General Russell Honoré, who helped as the master of disaster restore life in New Orleans after Katrina, is going to be introduced by one of your own, Coral Gables Mayor Don Sleznick, who many of you may not know is a retired lieutenant colonel. Please welcome Mayor Sleznick.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. No one can forget the images of devastation on the Gulf Coast left by Hurricane Katrina in August 2005, when it seemed that desperation and chaos were taking over the city of New Orleans. One man stepped in to take charge and restore order and hope, and that was General Russell L. Honoré. Let's look at him on the scene of the disaster and the work of the man who New Orleans Mayor Ray Nagin called one John Wayne Dude.
This new task force that is being established to deal with Katrina, who will be in charge? Who will run this operation? A one-star, a two-star, a three-star, or a four-star general?
Our understanding at this point, Wolf, and the announcement is not officially out yet, is it will be a three-star Army general. It will be.
This is a complex problem. It's called a disaster. Look up the meaning of a disaster.
Friday, September 2nd, 4 days after Katrina hit, the cavalry has arrived.
Hey, weapons down! Weapons down, damn it! Put the weapons down!
All I have to say this morning is hooray for Honoré. This guy seems to be the perfect guy for this job. Seeing him in the streets of New Orleans, telling them to put their M16s down, for gosh sakes, and let's get some tension out of here. Let a little steam off, please.
You saw Honoré yesterday doing really sort of almost symbolic things, but at one point, our Barbara Starr, who was right along there with him, witnessed him come up to a mother who had twin babies, and she was struggling to even hold on to them. He took the babies out of her arms, gave them to his soldiers, and arranged for them to immediately be medevaced to a ship offshore. Now, that's just one person, but what it sends a message that they understand the problem. Of course, his whole point about having the soldiers put their guns down, to again reinforce that they're here to help. They're not here to, intimidate people.
Well, I'll tell you where blame doesn't lie, and that's with a straight shooting, take charge John Wayne Dude, who never got stuck on stupid. He was exactly what the Gulf Coast needed right after Hurricane Katrina.
Don't get stuck on stupid, reporters.
That's BS. I will take that on behalf of every first responder down there. It's BS.
That's right. We'll never forget General Russell Honoré's one-liners, but we'll remember what he did for the hurricane victims even more. When President Bush assigned this Louisiana-born general to command Joint Task Force Katrina, Honoré knew this would be one of the most difficult missions in his career, but he was ready, and he became an overnight hero.
Please join me in welcoming CNN contributor and author of this newest book, Survival: How a Culture of Preparedness Can Save You and Your Family from Disasters. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce to you General Russell Honoré.
Thanks, Harold. Thank you. The third part of that is you might say, well, where did you get that number from? I made it up. As is the case, most of the things I'll tell you today are absolute truth, and there are a couple of them I made up. But the factor is when we look at your experience, my experience in dealing with disasters, we clearly see that you can be overmatched by a disaster. Now, I would be foolish to say we don't talk about the most recent disaster. That's the oil spill. So I brought a couple slides. What I'm about to show you, I drew up on my back porch the week after the oil spill took, and it took the federal government and the response team a month and a half to adapt it, or to acknowledge that we're going to treat the oil spill like a war and not like a PR campaign. First slide. Well, not that one, the next one. And, you know, we can learn a lot from our history. And from the inception of this oil spill, BP brought out its best PR people. And we had PR people talking to us as opposed to engineers. Now, all of you that's ever been in charge of anything or done anything or made something happen, you know it's the engineers that's got to fix this damn thing, not the PR people. So we kept talking about what we were going to do as opposed to what we were doing. So this is the campaign plan I drew up on my back porch. Next slide. Very simple. We've got to create a mission here. We've got to create this as a mission that this must be done. And there's no exception. We've got to deal with it. Stop it. That's been done finally. Remove mitigate the oil in the ocean. That hadn't been done. I think we've been fed a line of PR that the oil is gone. That oil is not gone. As being demonstrated while you sitting here all day today, experts are coming on and they're finding that oil. And I'm not quite sure how you figure only 1/3 of it left. It took us months to figure out how much was coming out, and all of a sudden we figured out only 1/3 of it's left. That's PR bullshit. It's kind of like you got to show me. The other one is take care of the people. I mean, as we look at these disasters, at the end of the day, we got a lot of creatures dying in the Gulf. Large creatures that we depend on for food and substance, and they're part of the eco-balance. But the folks we got to surely act like we care about is how we take care of the people. You know, that in the last election, they talked about Main Street and Wall Street. I'm here to tell you there's another street in America. It's called Railroad Street. And there's one in every one of your towns. You show me where the railroad is, and I'll show you where the land's the cheapest, and I'll show you where the elderly, the disabled, and the poor live. Ladies and gentlemen, that make up for 1/3 of the population of America. Show me where the railroad is. I remind you that in Katrina, there was a railroad ran through St. Bernard Parish and 9th Ward. 1/3 of the population. And in any disaster, they're the most vulnerable population. Because when the disaster happens, they probably won't have a car that will run. They probably won't have a credit card they can go charge a room in another town. And those were the people that we picked out off the streets in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. They were the people from Railroad Street. Who are we talking about as having the hardest time in the Gulf? It's not the people that own the multi-million-dollar hotels. It's the shrimp boat owner that owns 2 boats. And they make most of their money in about 3 months of the year. And then they spend the rest of the year limping along, taking odd jobs, and doing some other fish work, either catching bait fish or doing something to sustain themselves. Most of them live in the lower part of Plaquemine Parish and in the lower part of Jefferson Parish and off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. They're seasonal workers. And I can tell you, they're struggling. So take care of the people and then restore the coastline. Our coastline has been abused. We live along the Mississippi River in Louisiana. Every time somebody flush a toilet somewhere north of Louisiana, it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. Every time a farmer over-fertilizes a field somewhere in the Midwest to grow 250 acres of corn per acre, it has an impact in the Gulf of Mexico. What's going on in the Gulf now, this thing has raised a lot of people's attention. But there's an 800-mile dead zone in the Gulf from algae that's created by overprotein getting into the Gulf. Y'all better get into this. You may not have an oil problem, but you got a problem in that Gulf. And we need to protect that Gulf. Next slide. This was my six-point campaign plan on how we were going to do this, what we were going to do, and then how we were going to do it on the next slide. One of the things I recommended was to create this as a national disaster and take BP out of the claims business. It was absolute bullshit to try and think this company was going to do this. It's like being mugged and having the mugger determine your level of compensation. They shouldn't have been in that business. The federal government should have took this over and at least let FEMA work it or let the governors establish a commission on how we're going to pay people. But this was a problem, and it continues to be a problem. And people are now in there suffering, and now we got a man appointed by the president who will go down there and try to fix it. Next slide. Tough times, leading in tough times. I know all of you think you got it hard today. But as hard as we have it, we don't have it as hard as our first leaders of our country. Here you see old George Washington with what used to be referred in the history books as a ragtag army. Most of them couldn't read. Few of them had any skills as a soldier, yet they were fighting the most powerful army in the world, the British Army. They didn't have the proper equipment. Most of them didn't have a full magazine of ammunition. They didn't have the proper boots, and they were not well trained. Go back to that slide. I know what I look like, man. Yet on Christmas night, he takes his ragtag army. His army consisted of militia, which we know today as the National Guard, and some regular troops. And on the eve of this battle, Washington Army, 90% of it was gone. They were either AWOL or they were sick from the cold weather. And he decided to attack the British Army. Our capital in New York had been burned, and the one in Philadelphia was being threatened, the seat of our government. And Washington, with this ragtag army, decided to attack. What did these men did not have? There was no Veterans Affairs. There was no hospitals on the battlefield. What did they fight for? They fought for the concept of freedom as laid out in the Declaration of Independence. That promised them freedom. Freedom from a government that did not respect them to give them the right to vote. Freedom to be what you want. Freedom to live where you want. Freedom to marry who you want. And freedom of religion. On a piece of paper. The Declaration of Independence was 6 months old on the eve of this battle. King George III of England asked the people to pray, that the words of the Declaration of Independence as written would not come to fruition. You see, King George knew that if this new rule, this new form of government, a democracy, had taken place, it would end his form of government as he knew it. Freedom scared him. He asked his people to pray. The men in this battle, many of them were not free themselves. Some of them were indentured and some of them were slaves. But they fought for the promise of freedom, freedom that we know and enjoy today. So Washington, he gets ready to go into this fight. He doesn't have boats. Where did he get his boats from? You know, he practiced an old army practice that go back thousands of years. It's called tops. Y'all know what that is? Take other people's shit. Stuff, I'm sorry. So they borrowed the boats, left a little note and said, we'll bring them back tomorrow. They conducted this attack, and on that night they killed over 900 British soldiers, thereby keeping the revolution alive. And you think you got it tough today? And they went through Valley Forge after this. You think you got it tough today? You think we got it tough? Think about what our forefathers did so we could be free today. And every time you think you got it hard, pull this thing up on the internet and look at that picture. Now that's hard times. For what we enjoy today is freedom. After this battle, the British general wrote General Washington and said, hey, ask your soldiers to stop shooting our officers. It's bad for morale. You see, the British officers were from the middle class, and they were very influential in England. They didn't care about the privates they killed because they were from where? The lower class. In order to be a British officer, you had to be somehow linked to some royalty. And you had to buy your own uniform and go to the military college. I mean, you were somebody if you were a British officer. There's no way a poor boy from Lakeland, Louisiana, family of 12, come from a family of 12, raised on a subsistence farm, could grow up and be a general in the British Army at that time. There was no way. You see, the American troops fought for freedom. The British troops fought for the king. Y'all got me? And those American troops, those are your ancestors. And they wrote a check that we've got to cash. And that check is that to every generation, you must leave America free for the next generation. Do y'all believe in that? Do you believe in that? Do you believe in that? Next slide. As a reminder, we were born free by accident. You could have been born anywhere. It's all depending where your parents were at the time. Next slide. To live free is a privilege. Next slide. That's been paid for by our forefathers. And again, to each generation, we've got to cash that check. But it reminded me not long ago, during the Haitian earthquake, I mentioned on national television that I was very glad to see the governor of Florida stood up and brought those babies to Florida. I was very proud to see that. And that the other Gulf Coast governors ought to do the same thing. And a Baton Rouge reporter called me. I was traveling through the airport that night. He called me and he said, well, who's going to pay for that if we bring them babies here? I said, what do you mean, man? Who's going to pay for it? I said, I'm talking about bringing babies to keep them alive. I'm not talking about mass integration. I'm talking about bringing babies that if we won't bring them here, they're going to die. He said, why would we do that? You know, we having to lay off college professors because we got a budget problem. I said, look at here, mister. I don't give a shit if you publish this or not, but let me tell you the real truth about America. I said, who paid for World War I? And why did we go to World War I? To relieve tyranny and to give people an option for freedom. That's why we went to World War I. People being mercifully killed just because who they are and where they live. I said, why did we go to World War II? To prevent tyranny and to keep people from being slaughtered just because who they were and where they were born. I said, who paid for that? We paid for it. And you know what? They've had the longest history of freedom and peace in Europe in written history. From the freedom that our forefathers gave Europe, the people in Europe. And you know what? When we left, we didn't ask them for nothing. We didn't say, well, we want this museum with the lady in it. We don't want this statue over here. We don't want to take all your horses because we like how they... No, all we asked them for was one damn thing. A place to bury our dead. That's all we asked for. I said, mister, if you don't understand this, this is how we roll. We roll for freedom. And anybody who's willing to be free and fight for it, this is what we do as Americans. Who do you think going to pay for those babies? I mean, I was insulted. I spent 37 years, 3 months, and 3 days in the damn Army. We got continuous deployment of troops in Korea, in Europe, and every other place we've been, and every place we've been engaged with. Who do you mean is going to pay for it? That's how we roll. We believe in freedom. Next slide. And last and not least on this kick here, go ahead one more time. Those trees you see there, ladies and gentlemen, are Fort Stewart, Georgia. I used to be stationed there with the 3rd Infantry Division, Rocket of Mars, the Audie Murphy unit from World War II. That field was clean before we went into Iraq and Afghanistan. Today, it looked like a small park because of the number of trees that are in it. There's a tree for every soldier that died from that division. That's all that's left of them on Fort Stewart. And somewhere at Arlington or some small country cemetery somewhere, there's a little rock. That's all that's left of them. They gave their last measure for the freedom of other people. In regards to what we think about that war, we better honor those heroes. And we better never walk back on that promise. Go ahead. And I would say to die free is a responsibility to every generation. And you know what? We've got to breed this into our next generation. They can't walk away from this. This desire to be free and the desire to help other people be free. We cannot walk away from this as a nation. We can never get to a point to say we can't afford it. We can never get to a point to say we can't afford it. Never. Next slide. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a little clip from New Orleans. I hope this never comes to your city. The people we were dealing with in New Orleans when I arrived there in Mississippi on Tuesday, you remember the storm hit Monday. Tuesday I was in Mississippi, and Wednesday I arrived in New Orleans. There's nobody we picked up in those Army helicopters when they got in the helicopter, looked down and said, damn, I left my Lexus. We picked up poor people. And I'm telling you, when there's a disaster in your community, it's going to be the elderly, the disabled, and the poor you're going to have to take care of. They die in higher numbers than any other part of the demographics. When you tell them to leave, people with cars generally going to leave. There was an 80% evacuation rate before Katrina. Any of you knew that? Watching the news, you probably wouldn't. Now, I'm worried about Florida. I'm very worried about Florida because my grandson lives here, over near St. Pete, and his mama and his daddy. I'm a little worried about Florida because I think people are overwatching the Weather Channel. And they want to make decisions, well, that's just a Category 2, we can handle that. Well, as we've come to find out, it's not the Category 2. You probably can handle it. It's that 10-foot tidal surge that's going to get you. It's the tidal surge that's going to get you. You know, water destroyed more homes every year than any other event. And finally, the National Hurricane Center is starting to talk about tidal surge. You know, there was a 30-foot wall of water that hit Biloxi, Mississippi. And a 17-foot wall of water pushed into New Orleans, overtopping the levee. What do you think the elevation is of Miami? Huh? Yeah, there's some people said 9 feet. I said, okay, let's show me that spot. What is the elevation of Tampa? Think about it. The right front of that storm will push tidal surge in. Matter of fact, 2 years ago when Hurricane Gustav came to Louisiana, it pushed the water so high in the 9th Ward, it was overtipping the levee again. Tidal surge. Understand where your city's set and get those areas marked for the people to let them know what might be the maximum tidal surge so they know if they live inside that zone, they need to leave. because I'm a little concerned because there are people in Florida who say we can handle a Category 3 where we live. How many of you can handle a 7-foot, 10-foot, or 15-feet tidal surge? That's the question. And that is what you leaders need to be talking to your people about in plain English. Not the damn weatherman, not your public affairs officers. You, the leaders. And go around there and somewhere you think it could happen in those canals, that water push into Beaumont, Texas. Any of you ever been to Beaumont, Texas? 4 foot of water in Hurricane Ike. It takes an hour from the end of Plaquemine Parish to get into New Orleans by car. In that storm, Katrina pushed a 17-foot swell in through Lake Borge on the north side of New Orleans and overtopped the levees. We've got to get in and study the understanding of tidal surge. And to the people in Tampa, it is not true. It is a myth. The Indian mounds will not protect you. And keep encouraging those people in Key West to lead. Ladies and gentlemen, those of you that are geographically challenged, this here is a map of the United States of America. Some of you remember the hurricane in 1935 called Hemingway's Hurricane. It overtopped Key West. At the time that hurricane was coming, the National Weather Service and people in Washington gave warning. There's one group of Americans I like to talk about we lost during that storm. There were over 250 veterans helping build a railway and roads between Miami and Key West. You might say, well, why were they out there, General? Because the year before, they were in Washington, D.C., camped out on the mall. See, these veterans were veterans of World War I, came back from the war, and they had been promised a bonus by the government. But the government was going through what in 1935? Depression. And the government said, wait 10 years, we will give you your bonus. And they've already been back from the war over 5-10 years. So a group of veterans hijacked a train from Washington, state of Washington. They came across the country picking up veterans, and many of them massed in Washington, D.C., living on the mall, living in empty federal buildings. And the president at the time got mad at them, said a bunch of bums, and he turned to his favorite general, General MacArthur, who brought in the 3rd Cavalry Regiment, and they drove those veterans off of the mall into Anacostia and put them on trains and boats, shipped them out all over America to go work on public work projects. And that was one of the projects. They were living in barges. During the mangroves down there, if you read the story about it, and there's several of them about it, you ought to read it. One person would be working, and 2 of them would have palmetto bushes beating the mosquitoes off of them. But that was the only work they could find to send money back home to their family. After the weather service told them, hey, the hurricane's coming, the governor of Florida said, I got it. The adjutant general of the Florida National Guard said, I got it. And the guy building the railroad said, I got it. Know what happened? None of them had it. And over 250 of them died on a barge between Miami and Key West. I tell you that because things as we know it today weren't always that way. We didn't have the 24-hour news cycle, right? And it's up to you, the leaders, to remember the sacrifice of those who kept us free, but that if it happened in 1935, it can happen again. Back to that map, please, sir. 1900, hurricane going to Galveston Bay, killed 7,000 people. Came in the middle of the night. Government didn't know what to do with them. What they decided to do, they put them on barges. They found the dead, wrapped them, put them on barges, and sent the barges out in the Gulf and dumped the bodies. Guess what happened 2 to 3 months later? Those body started to wash back into the shore. Bad idea. Since then, what's happened? They put a seawall in Galveston. The last time a hurricane was headed in there, we had United States Air Force planes flying into the eye of the storm. We had buoys at sea. We had mayors and state and county officials standing up telling the people, you need to evacuate now. We had the United States military put airplanes in there to take civilians out of hospitals, out of the most vulnerable areas. Storm came, almost same intensity, almost same location. This time we lost less than 35 people. So technology can make a difference. Command and control can make a difference. Leadership by you mayors make a difference. Again, for every dollar you spend on preparedness, you save $9 on response. But there's still areas we got to work on and improve. FEMA has been substantially changed since Katrina. From an organization that had to be pulled into your community, one that pushes itself and pre-positioned equipment and stuff inside your community. That can make a big difference in your response. But the most vulnerable population, again, you're going to still have to have a plan to evacuate them from the low-lying areas. That 9th Ward group, you're going to have to evacuate them out. Long Island. There was a hurricane went up to Long Island called the New England Express. It overtopped Long Island in the 1930s. What would happen if Long Island got topped today? Overtopped. The estimate is that it would put at least one story of water in Wall Street. Can it happen? Yes. I'm certainly not wishing it happened, but it can happen. The problem we face with in America today is, well, that's never happened here before. You know, we don't have the Katrina kind of thing down here in Florida. Remember Hurricane Wilma. Remember Hurricane Wilma. Wilma surprised the hell out of us. Remember that little hook it made? It came back out. Wilma surprised us. And basically all it did was cut the lights out. Ladies and gentlemen, when we lose power in this country, it's set back the way we live 80 years. It cut the lights out. Now, sir, can I ask you a question? Where do you think the generator was for the Charity Hospital in New Orleans? In the basement. Right next door to VA Hospital, same thing. Now, who does that hospital affect? The Railroad Street people. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it wasn't them that decided that. It's some dude flying around, some engineer who got overrode by the CFO, who decided they could save some money by putting it in the basement. Whereas you and I know the basement of that hospital should be what? A parking garage. You know, after Katrina, I'm still appalled to go to Tampa, to the City Club there and look out, and there is the public hospital, the Tampa version of what? Charity Hospital. It's literally on the damn water. You can put your hand down and touch it. And I'm saying to myself, didn't they see Katrina? The first floor of that hospital need to be what? A parking garage. Ladies and gentlemen, if the first floor of the Charity Hospital and the VA Hospital in New Orleans was a parking garage and a generator on the second floor, those two hospitals be open today. As we speak, the government, federal government, is putting in there over $1 billion to replace those two hospitals. And it'll take another 4 years before they're open. So, prior planning in Mississippi, the governor of Mississippi, the week after the storm, said, I need you to send some military planes in here to pick up people who survived the storm. The problem is they couldn't get medication. So they were getting sick. All the drugstores are closed between Biloxi and Jackson, Mississippi, because there's no electricity. So I said, okay, so we started pushing what? We pushed gasoline to gas stations. We gave every gas station a generator, and we gave generators to the drugstores. And CDC and the Navy put a lot of medicines down there to try to take care of folks, because believe it or not, people would rather stay at home with no electricity rather than go to a shelter. Now, the only thing that gave them the power to do that was what? If they could get their medication and if they could go get food every couple of days at a distribution point. Now, sir, back to you. You look like a pretty willing participant. What size generator does it take to run a drugstore? Okay. You're right, an IBG, itty-bitty generator. Now, following that same logic, sir, what size generator does it take to run a hospital? Right, a BFG. Y'all got a dirty mind, I tell you that. Y'all got a dirty mind. Because BFG means big facility generator. Dirty mind. Hey, look, do you think them three-letter drugstores need you to buy a generator for them? You think these big-ass gas companies need you to buy a generator for them? But you can fix that, can't you? Because you know what, mister? If you want a permit to put a generator or a drugstore, you got to have a generator. You want to put a store in this town? Or if you want to generate, get your license next year, you got to have a generator. Because if you can keep the drugstores and the gas stations open, right, what you can do, you can shelter people in your community. Because sometimes you're not going to get it right. And the weatherman won't get it right. And sometimes the storm do just what the hell they want, right? People start thinking, well, they're going to follow that little line right there. So storm do what they want. And sometimes we get surprised. But if we've got gasoline, which means every gas station ought to be, and Florida came close, then somebody, politician got in there and said, well, let's put a little exception in here. You only got to have it if you have over 5. Or some bullshit like that. But you can fix that, right? You and your county commissioners run your own what? Building plan and policies. I'm telling you, from the number of people we got in America today that's concentrated in large urban areas, in these large cities, and the large number of railroad people you got in there, meaning people that the government's going to have to immediately come in and take care of, everybody else in that town with a job got to do what? They got to be prepared. Now let's take a quick test. How many of you have an evacuation plan? Okay, that's very good. How many of you have an evacuation kit? That's pretty good. How many of you have money in your evacuation kit? Uh-oh, numbers going down. Why do you want cash in your evacuation kit? ATM won't work, and we all know the ATM guys get the word before anybody else and they leave town. How many of you have 3 days supply of food and water at home? That's pretty good, or you're lying. That's pretty good. That's better than most groups. And I'm not talking about that old deer sausage from 2 years ago. I'm talking about legitimate survivor food. I'm not talking about the type of food on a Saturday night when it's raining and you get hungry, you don't want to go to the store, you go eat it. I'm talking about some of that white tuna in water that will last forever. Survival food. That's what we've got to have in our evacuation pack. In our 3-day supply of food and water. How many of you have a weather radio? That's pretty good. You know, sir, they make them now, they're no longer analog. You can get a digital one. They're no more analog when you leave that thing on. The National Weather Service is here to report to you that there are thunderstorms in Mobile Bay. So what's the first thing you do? You turn the damn thing off at 2 o'clock in the morning. Right. So you come up. You can go out now. You go to your favorite discount store, and you can get a weather radio for what I pay for 2 good bottles of red wine, about $20. And they're digital. You can set it for your area code. You go get that digital radio, bring it home. Have your kids set it for you, Mr. Bill? Grandkids, and you're good to go. We got to take care of the elderly. Old folks that live on their own, get them an evacuation pack. And I'm talking about creating a culture of preparedness. What I'm pressing, what to tell you is, next Mother's Day and Father's Day, as opposed to giving Grandma another one of those fancy kitchen things she won't use, or Grandpa an $80 silk tie he won't wear, give him $80 silk tie he won't wear. Give them an evacuation pack if they live on their own. Put some food, put some survival food, put some water in there, put some cash in there. A couple extra pieces of clothes. Next year, Mother's Day and Father's Day come around, you would do what? You replace the water, right? And what else you do? You put the cash back in? And they're going to be good for another year. Little things, little shifts that we could do. If you are prepared, get your employees prepared. I was asking the governor in Georgia, he asked me to come over after Katrina wanted to talk. I said, well, Governor, tell me this. You saw what unfolded in New Orleans, Mississippi. What would you do if a storm approached Savannah? He said, well, Ruff, we'll evacuate that damn place early. I said, good. I said, well, where will the people go? Well, they got their own plan, right? You know, this is America. They do what the hell they want. These Georgians. I said, all right. I said, how would you recall them? He said, well, we got a phone tree. I said, uh-oh. Phone tree? I said, Governor, if a phone tree worked, you didn't have a disaster. You had an inconvenience. Because in a real disaster, the power's out, and you can just about depend on what happened. The phone's not working. But if you got a mass migration of people, as we did during Katrina, we had over 200,000 people ended up in and around Baton Rouge. The city doubled in size. You couldn't get a phone call in there. Why? Because the phone system is built only to handle about, what, 30% of the people who owns the phone at any given time. And then when we went from analog to digital, well, what happened with the police? They all went to the digital networks that work off the cell towers. So you've got to be able to communicate. And you got to have satellite backup communications in your community. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to talk. And that's what happened during Katrina. That's what happened when we worked this scenario out with the governor of Georgia. I said, let's talk about this. How about all the plumbers go in 100 miles and they take their family with them that work for the city, and they go to this university? How about all your electricians go over here? All your truck drivers go. Have a pre-designated place, because that next day, Governor, you're going to need all those people. And you know what? You don't need to leave all of them in the city. You need to be able to do what? Recall them. After Katrina, what we ended up with, we had city, state, and federal workers scattered all over the South with no way to recall them, because they didn't provide a place for the key workers to go with their families. That's all I'm saying. There's a better way to do it than the way it's being played out in many municipalities today. The other thing is, plan for the worst case scenario. When you go back and you look at your hurricane plan during September, go back, mayors, and take it to the worst case scenario. And that is your city on the water and you got no electricity. And plan your way out of it. Unfortunately, many times we go to the worst case scenario, but what we plan for? We resource the best case scenario. Well, we won't have to call the state in here. We've got to handle this. Right? And the state guy said, well, we're not going to call the feds in here. We've got to handle this. It scares the hell out of me. We had a situation with Hurricane Wilma. As Wilma was coming around the coast of Florida, I wanted to send a ship in behind it, because I was still the first Army commander. And Florida was mine to support. So I called the Navy. I said, get the Navy up and start kicking it in the butt, boys. Follow that damn storm in. You come in through the west side of Florida, get the ship ready in Norfolk, start coming in when it comes out the other side. So call up the Adjutant General, who was Burnett at the time. He said, well, I'll tell my governor that. I said, in the meantime, I'm putting the command and control structure in Florida. We're going to put it in with the National Guard guys down in Tampa. So about 4 or 5 hours later, the Adjutant General called me back and said, my governor say there'll be no federal troops in Florida. I said, well, Bud, why don't you go back and tell your governor that we already got federal troops in Florida. Tell him, look outside the window when you see them F-16s flying about, and them 130s and 17s flying in and out of Big Deal and Tyndall. What the hell is he talking about, no federal troops? He's already got federal generals in Florida. Now, if you don't want them after the storm, Virginia will take them. And I said, oh, by the way, go back and tell your governor, this is the United States of America, and I'm a federal general. I go just where the hell I want to go. Now, because there's a difference between going somewhere and doing something, right? But I can go into MacDill anytime I want, with as many troops that I want, and he ain't got a damn thing to say about it. The difference is if I go there or if I start doing something. Y'all understand what I'm saying, people? And that, you know, we went through that kabuki dance, put his brother in a bad position, who had recently had his ass whipped over Katrina for not getting enough troops there on time. Bad position. There was a hard Thanksgiving after that in that family. Because Rumsfeld was called and said, General, we got the right stuff ready. I said, yeah, but there's a little pushback going on in Florida. I mentioned that to you to tell you, even after Katrina, we got people running on bravado and pride. Don't want the federal troops to pre-deploy. So we could be there the next day. I mean, you can't have it both ways, right? We just got, I mean, this turned a significant downturn in that president's tour. I mean, as a federal officer, I just do what I'm told. I'm a federal officer in uniform. I don't care what party they are. When they're the president, they're the president. If they say jump, we say jump how high and how fast. And it can't be no other way in America. And so the folks was wanting to know how we were preparing. I said, well, this is the problem. The governor of Florida don't want it. The storm came through. You know what it did. It made that loop, come out the other side, cut the lights out. There are many people, I mean, people ended up in pretty good shape, but many of them wanted to, what, leave, but it didn't have, gas stations weren't open and stuff, they couldn't leave. So it wasn't a ninth ward situation, but we had a shortage of food and water at the right place in the right time. So next day, the Adjutant General called me, old Doug Burnett, a good friend of mine. He said, I need you to get some C-17 saddled up. I need you to go to Texas and pick up some Jimmy Dean sandwiches. I said, Doug, are you out of your damn mind? All the food you got in Florida, you want me to go haul Jimmy Dean sandwiches from, y'all know what a Jimmy Dean sandwich is? It about look like dog food. It is bad. To me, an MRE is several notches above that kind of product. So we sent C-17s in Texas to go get these old leftover sandwiches. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we were out of MREs. We had 2 wars going on, and we had just finished Katrina. We had no MREs we could use for this kind of operation here. So we flew those things in here to try to take a little heat off the governor because people were down there starting the food shortages because the stores weren't open. Because why? Because the stores didn't have generators. So I say that to you to tell you, let's take the lessons from those storms and let's see how we're going to prepare our cities. Because you have seen nothing till you see 30,000 people standing there without food and water. The next thing I'll tell you, Mayor, is if that does happen to you, do not tell your troops to start shooting people when they're trying to get food and water. There's no way I'll defend the dude with some lowrider pants, knee-deep in water, and a 52-inch TV on his back. They're stupid. Don't worry about it. You'll get them later. But I'll tell you, we can't start shooting people that are breaking into stores to get food and water. I'm telling you, please don't do it. The night before we took the people out of the convention center, the governor's office said we're going to shoot people on sight. There's two things wrong with that. People have been standing in the city for some of them for 8 days with no electricity, no access to food and water other than what was in the stores. I'm asking you, what would you do if you were standing at the convention center? It's called people are going to go into survival mode. And on the night before we got that rescue going at the convention center, the governor said, these troops are well trained, they got M16s, and I'm telling them to shoot on sight. Well, what kind of shit is that? Shoot what on sight? Across from the convention center, there's a little restaurant. I went to visit 2 years after I got out of the Army, and I saw the guy in there, and I said, well, what happened to your store? He said, you know, those dirty bastards that came in here and stole all the food. I said, well, you probably kept a lot of people alive because your store was well stocked. He said, well, guess what else, General? They took all the best liquor. And I said, well, I'm thinking back. Here's Honore in that place. I got a little food. I got a little water. I said, liquor. Ain't had a bath in 4 or 5 days. Don't have my right medication. A little shot right now. No, I'm going to take this cheap shit down here. I swear to God. I said, yeah, they took all the best liquor. Well, what would you take? I was standing around the convention center. We got the people out of there. A jeweler came up. And he said, you know, General, I need you to put some federal troops here to protect my jewelry store. And then I started thinking about stupid. Now, we watched this hurricane come out of Florida. It took 5 days to get here. And you want me to put federal troops to protect your jewelry store. I said, mister, all you had to do was take that cheap shit you had, put it in the trunk of your car, and leave town. I mean, it's like stupid been bred into us. What would our forefathers do? Huh? They knew how to take care of themselves a little better than we do. We got to teach these kids to be survivors and not be victims. All of us that with jobs, we've got to be ready. You got to prepare your employees. They got to go when you tell them to go, and they've got to be able to return when you say return. Because, ladies and gentlemen, that third of America, that's real. It's the elderly, the disabled, and the poor. They die at very high numbers if we don't have a plan to get them out. All of you know this. Yet we have a hard time determining where are those disabled folks in our community that have mobility problems. And, okay, sometimes it's mental. They have mental issues. They die at a very high rate. Look, I wish I could talk a little longer, but they got the hook on me. But I think we do have a time for a couple questions. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Here you go. Here you go.
Yes.
Oh. I notice you have a Red Cross pin on your lapel. I think that the biggest problem we have before the storm is a lot of people don't know where the Red Cross shelters are.
Right.
And I think that's a very, very important factor.
Oh, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because now is the time the mayors need to be working with not just the Red Cross, because the Red Cross is just part of it. By the National Response Plan, the Red Cross is responsible for what? Shelters. But they do that based on not on federal grant, but on volunteer money and volunteers. It is time that you mark where those potential shelters are in your community. We've got issues with those shelters because many of them won't take people with disabilities. So we got to sort through that. But identifying where they are and having a public service announcement daily, putting it in the paper, having people put it on the side of the refrigerator so they know where the local shelter is very important. I joined the Red Cross. I got in the Army one day in February 2 years ago. Next day, I went down to Red Cross and said, I'm going to be a volunteer, and what I'm going to do is go around the country and do speeches for you. Last year, I helped them raise about $250,000. And I will come to your Red Cross chapter for fundraising. All you got to do is tell them, write me an email, and I'll come. Come for free. They buy me a ticket, we come in, we get that money. Now, because I learned as a young boy, God gave us two hands for a reason. One to do for ourselves, one to do for others. And it's the quickest way right now we can help people, because the Red Cross take care of poor people. People get confused. Well, you know, my roof was damaged. Red Cross people come by, they didn't give me nothing. It's not designed for you. You got a damn job. It's designed for people that can't take care of themselves. That's the organization that's in your town. If there's a fire tonight on Railroad Street, they're going to find a place for those people to stay. If there's a fire around one of these mansions over here, nobody's going to call the Red Cross. The only reason the Red Cross would show up is to help the firemen and give them some Kool-Aid. Right? They're not there to take that people out of that mansion and go put them in a hotel. It ain't going to happen. The Red Cross is there to take people and take them to a Motel 6 and make sure they got food and water and what? Medicine. They're here to take care of the poor. A lot of people in New York got pissed off after 9/11. All that money was given. They said, well, we want our $500,000 from the Red Cross. It ain't going to happen. The government gave them $1 million or whatever it was for those who lost people. But they're not going to get a part of the Red Cross, because the Red Cross is spending money on what? Taking care of people who lost their job, who can't buy medicine, who can't keep the rent in their house. That's who they're taking care of. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Daisy Lynham from the city of Orlando. Are you recommending new building codes, from what I can hear, on construction that would include generators and all these other electrical things to go topside, at least off the bottom floor to the, what do you call it, the roof line?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you still in New Orleans?
I live in Baton Rouge, about 40 miles out of New Orleans.
Well, we like that accent.
And I also recommend, Mayor, that y'all get your gas stations and your drugstores. When you look at the urban areas today, particularly in the downtown area, there aren't many stores. So you'll see where a lot of the people are using those drugstores that have that extended space and they got food and water in them and medication. You can keep a lot of people alive if they're a part of your response plan. And that drugstore has got a generator and he's got a team to stay open, because people can't do without their medication. Yes, ma'am.
General, what would be your advice to local governments as far as working together so that we are each very familiar with each other's evacuation plans or emergency preparedness plans?
I think, you know, inside the states now, man, we've got a thing with the National Guard where they help each other. I think collaboration amongst cities and municipalities to take care of the most vulnerable population is that if you've got a nursing home, that you force that nursing home to have a collaboration with another nursing home that might be outside of your area of operation so you can take those elderly patients. The other thing we got to do this time of year is we got to start a football season. You might say, what the hell is he talking about? I'm telling you, before Hurricane Katrina and before Hurricane Gustav, guess what was played in New Orleans the night before the hurricane came? A damn football game. And the day before Hurricane Gustav, there was a football game at LSU. It's only 70 miles away, but when you have football games at these flagship universities, guess what they suck up? All the hotel spaces. Now, I'm very concerned about the Southeast. We're very vulnerable this time of year. On Friday night, if you want to find a leader, where are they? High school football. You want to find one on Saturday night, where they are? College football. That we don't become so distracted that we got the vulnerable population when we should be evacuating them, people are concerned about, well, the old state, they got to play that game tonight. You better get down there and start worrying about who's going to get those poor people out of that town and out of that vulnerable area. I've seen it play out several times. Nobody talk about it, but it's a factor. And somehow y'all lived through all these hurricanes in 2004, you remember? Every one of them came on a weekend. Every damn one. Then the next year, Katrina came on a weekend. And then Hurricane Gustav did the same thing. End of the month on a weekend. So keep your situational awareness up. Yes.
I don't think, General, thank you very much for coming. I think we're all benefiting from your wisdom and moral compass, and I wanted to get maybe a little bit off of natural disaster, and if you want to pass on this because it's too politically sensitive, then I appreciate it. But you talked a lot about freedom. We're in the middle of a political cycle right now where the issue of immigration in Arizona is getting hot.
Yeah.
We have a number of people in our communities that have children that were born here and they're children of undocumented parents, and we have some proposals that are talking about someone is stopped at a traffic stop who's a working mother or father of those children, and to then deport them and get them out of the state. And I was wondering if that's, again, just appreciating the moral compass, and I think it's refreshing to hear the frankness in your words and the way you put it. If you have any words of wisdom for us, particularly we as local elected officials, that I agree with you, the other side of the railroad tracks, and whether we like it or not, we have 15-20% of our communities that are now Hispanic, and we have a portion of that section of the community that is undocumented, and many of whom have been living in our community perhaps as many as 20 years. And these are citizens more so perhaps in many ways than some of these transplants that have retired here 2 or 3 years ago, and wondering if you could speak to that for us.
Yeah, I'll speak to it, because you're right, I'm not a damn politician. Unfortunately, I'm not a politician, and for good reason I'm not a politician yet. And I hadn't thought very much if I was ever asked in public what I'd do about this, but you know, for a long time we've kind of evolved as a country. And since the amendment was written that said if you're born here, you're American, a lot has changed. And what we continue to see is the ability in Washington not to deal with the topic, because whoever leads it one way or the other is not a popular topic to talk about. I have 4 children, 2 of them born in, one in Holland and one in Germany as a result of our being assigned there. The day they were born there, they became a member of that state, Germany and Holland. Now, they got dual citizenship, and we had to go to our own government and show the birth certificate and everything else for them to come back to America, and they came back with their American passport. But their birth certificate was first documented in those 2 countries. So I think we're going to have to find a compromise position on this from what you hear on both sides of the aisle here. You understand? People who think that there's a new interpretation of the amendments as we know them, that if you're born here, you're an American. And the concept of people flying here and having babies, that's been going on for years. That's what the rich foreigners do. I know it was in South Korea. 2 or 3 of my friends were high-ranking South Korean officers, and many of them were executives. All of their grandchildren were Americans. They'd fly in, have a kid 2 or 3 months later go back. So some people say that's loopholes. I do think we need to deal with it, but you got to remember, during my 37 years in the Army, I can't tell you the number of young men who were born in America who lost their lives wearing this uniform, you understand? And their parents were not legal. I can't tell you how many. And they came from U.S. territories in some case, and they came from south of the border. I think we are blessed to be in a country that our people are fighting to get into. Do I think we need to probably make some changes? Yes. But we got to remember the problem wasn't created overnight. We're not going to solve it overnight. And this thing about being able to let's protect the border first. Well, what the hell are you going to do about all this ocean over here in Florida? And that big-ass border we got with Canada up north. You know fences don't work, right? I do think it's going to take a compromise, and we're going to have to think big, okay? We're going to have to think big. Because the promise has been, if you're born here, I do think we got to do better with, but how do you deal with this at the federal level and at the state? And at the same time, you got sanctuary cities. I think the conversation has to be one where we're going to have to take the Congress and the Senate and put them all out on a little island someplace. Take all the TVs away. That's what I would do if I was in charge for a day. They said, when y'all figure this shit out, you can come back.
General, just time for one more question.
But I feel we've gone this far, and to come back and now and say, young kid, you know, I know of a kid in New Orleans. His uncle went home, brought him. His mom and dad had gotten killed in an accident. He brought this young boy home. Today he is 26 years old. He has no papers. I mean, he doesn't know that homeland he came from down in South America. It's not that kid's fault. He's working, but he can't get a Social Security card. He can't go to work. What are we going to do? It's not the kid's fault. I think we're going to have to show some compassion here. Remember that first part, we were born free by what? By accident. And all of us came to this country one way or the other. Some of us came on the front of the boat. Some of us came on the back of the boat. Some of us was pushed on the boat. But we got here. And I think we need to look at the contribution and the potential of what the worst case, if the people who say no and say, let's send them home, what would that make your community look like? If we started rounding people up, all right, over a damn piece of paper. What would our community look like if we took the worst case scenario, say if you don't have papers, we're going to put all of you on a bus and we're going to drop you somewhere. What would that look like on the evening news? What would it look like on the evening news? On the other hand, we just can't look the other way, right? Because there's a lot of people who went through the right process to do what? So I think the extremes on either side of this issue should be avoided. We ought not be rounding people up. That would make reminiscence of what the pre-World War II things were happening, rounding people up. We can't round people up. But we should sure do better than what we're doing now. Wouldn't you believe? And I think we just going to have to be a bigger people, sort it out, tell our folks, hey, you got to sort that out, or we're going to change all of you out. And I think eventually it'll work through. I do know this. If it was easy, it would have been solved. And it's a good thing we got people having a dialogue on it. I'll just tell you, stay clear of people who are extreme on either side. That we're going to have to figure a middle-of-the-road answer. Because I just wouldn't want to see the worst-case scenario of us going in every community and just having people loading them up. After particularly after a lot of these kids have already assimilated and in school, they know of no other country. So we're blessed, aren't we, to be in a country that people fight to get into. God bless America. God bless you. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.